We have recently been introduced to a group of like-minded people looking to escape the state and build a remote permaculture community. We don't know the people well, and this is new to us, but they seem intelligent, insightful, and driven by a pursuit of freedom and resilience. Question 1, what are the common mistakes to avoid when building a community like this? How do we set up for success? Question 2, we watched the Finding the Right Land Part 1 with Rob. That was the one we did at the when I was in Alberta, at the Sprung House there, Rob, and loved it. The rest of the series still coming. Thanks, guys. Yeah, we should probably pick that up again, Rob. There's probably more we could do now that you've got your contour generator thing happening too. But yeah, so what do you think about that?
So I would say I should probably just start with my bias. My bias is that starting communities is a bad idea. And so, and there's lots of reasons for that, not because I'm from Alberta and I'll leave that one on the table. But the thing is that like we have established norms and contracts and a financial system. Australia is similar in this regard. And so if you want to start a community, depending on whether it's going to be rural, like a larger piece of land or a smaller piece of land, at least in Alberta, we have a ton of small towns that are dying right now. Like you can buy a house for $4,000 in certain parts of this province. And if you decide you don't like it, you can put it back up on the market and you can walk away from it. But the minute you start creating contracts to co-own land with people, it gets very complicated very quickly. And so you gotta be really careful about that. The other thing that I would say is that, I lost my train of thought. You might have to step in there and add what you're thinking about, Dakota. I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Sure. So first off, I also want to, I want to agree with what Rob said, but I also want to say, like, living in communities is probably one of the hardest things you can ever do. It's also probably one of the most rewarding, and it's also probably one of the most important survival survival things that you could have, because people are so valuable to have as resources. And also to say is like, Rob, you're also kind of starting a commune yourself right now, so you can't really say that you don't want to have people living on your property.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say is, like, before you start a community, confirm that you can live with your mother-in-law first.
Yeah. And so, but everything that Rob has said is absolutely true. Rob and I've done, I don't know, a handful of consulting jobs with kind of community groups like this. And most of them have either disintegrated during the consulting process, when Rob and I started to kind of poke questions like, how are you doing this? What's your exit clause? Who makes decisions? Things like that. Like within like a few weeks, everything just falls apart. And then the other ones have just fallen apart shortly afterwards. However, there are existing, land sharing cooperatives and things like that have existed successfully for long periods of time. I would reach out to them to get their, the resources and figure out how they've done it. But I personally, I like where Rob was going was this idea of how do you create kind of all the benefits of living in community with none of the downsides and as much optionality as possible. And it's like, take over a small town, go in, find a small town that's in an agricultural region. Everybody buys a little, half-acre lot in the town, and then you buy a quarter section right next door, and you're done. It's like, and then like the quarter section is owned, collectively, or everybody pays rent to that or something like that. But you all have your own property, and so you secure, because like shit happens. People get sick. People die. Things happen, and it's really difficult when you're tied to the this bigger thing. And also, like our culture has developed to the point where like individualism, I think, is an essential part of who we are as a species. And to live to go back to living in like a tribal way, I don't think most people can do it. And I personally don't want to do it. Like I like being able to have a little bit of autonomy over at least some part of my space, and to not have to have to
Man,
make every decision in a kumbaya circle. So like
running through the flower fields, holding hands and singing
yeah,
naked. And
yeah,
I've toured a lot of these permaculture communities, and they've always been a gong show. Often it's a strange thing too. There's sort of a matriarch in place, or some kind of guru or something, and relationships always get screwed up if people aren't married or have kids in there. It becomes just a big, I don't know what the polite way to say it is, but people screw around, and it causes massive drama. So there's other ways. Dakota touched on it a little bit. Is take over a small town. I mean, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm not publicizing where my land is, because I don't want everybody knocking on my door like they do when I place in Kelowna. I'm getting tired of that. But look at areas that haven't changed in a long time. For me, I'm really I really am opposed to the whole sustainable development in the as referred to in Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. It's far from sustainable. It's basically just a new technocracy. And so when I'm looking at places, when I was looking for my land, I was looking at places and towns that didn't have a sustainable development plan. So townships, municipalities, and in unincorporated areas that don't have a sustainable development plan, don't have progressive city councils, because progressive just means regressive, in my opinion. And so looking at those things, and then getting people into a region. So you don't necessarily have to all be on the same land, because there is a lot of technicalities there that when the rubber meets the road, and say, okay, I've got this 400 acres, and if everybody just chips in 50 grand, we can do it. I've been trying to do that for years. And when the rubber meets the road, when it's time to put the cash down, that's when everything falls apart. So it's easier just to go do it yourself, and do it in a place where there's room for other people to come around, buy the lot next to you or whatever. I just had that happen with a good friend of mine who bought the lot next to me. And, set yourself up for optionality in the future. Don't go into the hippest little town in California where everybody wants to be, and expect that you're going to be able to have people move into that area, because it's high demand. You want to be in an area where there's no demand. You make the demand. And so buying land as a group is very complicated.
And like, you could replace the word land with business. I mean, the thing is, it's really easy to get into a relationship. It takes a lot more intelligence to figure out how you're going to get out of it. And you have to figure that out before you do it. The thing that I've seen that is the most sad thing that I've seen in these communities is when people want to sell, and they want to basically liquefy their assets.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the whole community has to agree upon who's going to buy that asset. So now, not only do you have to go through the conventional sales process, you got to list it somewhere, but you got to have a consensus from the rest of the people that are living on that property about who's going to buy. Like, you have no agency over your resources anymore. Versus if you own your own piece of land, you can liquefy those assets as required. And hopefully somebody moves in that's cool, that doesn't destroy your life's work. But at the end of the day, things happen. Like Dakota said, you get sick and you've got to get rid of that asset and turn it into something else. You lose a lot of the agency in a community setting.
Yeah.
And like, I live in kind of redneck Alberta. And so one of the things that kind of I was concerned about moving into kind of the rural areas of our province, we're kind of like the Texas of the North. And I've been dropping off gifts to all of my neighbors. Like, we make gingerbread houses around this time of year. And so every one of my neighbors has gotten a gingerbread house from me. Even if you don't agree with everything that your neighbors do or think or whatever, like if they are less quote unquote progressive than you, which is a pretty cocky thing to say, they have tractors and they've got equipment, and they all live by this ethic of the land, whether they probably have never put words to it. But last year, I swear to God, I thought Corb Lund was going to show up on my driveway and start singing "Truck Got Stuck," because I got my truck stuck, and then I got my tractor stuck, and then I got my side-by-side stuck. And it was just a total cluster. And neighbor that I didn't even know happened to drive by with his 4x4 diesel truck, he pulled me out, and then he got stuck, and then I pulled him out, and it was like a whole ordeal.
Hilarious.
But there was no, it didn't matter that like we were neighbors, and that was all that mattered. It was like, I know that one day you're going to have to pull me out. And so I'm going to spend an hour of my life pulling you out because now I have a debt to you. And that's the kind of community that we're going to need, because it's not about building a community on a piece of land. It's about building relationships amongst people. And I think that's probably one of the most valuable things that we can all be doing right now in this fiasco that we find ourselves in. The whole mask thing and like where society is going, it's actually literally disintegrating culture. And the opposite has been happening out here in the rural areas. Like we're actually starting to become, we have our own form of solidarity out here.
Absolutely.
That's always existed and probably always will exist, because that's a bare necessity of living in kind of in a remote area
in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an important kind of thing that kind of popped up for me here. So the first is like there's a difference between the goal, the reason why people want to buy land together as a community is kind of twofold. One is like you get the benefit of working together as a community, and you can kind of share skills, and many hands makes light work, stuff like that. But then the second piece is land is really expensive, and if you pool kind of your financial resources in particular, you can buy land together. That's the kind of main impetus. So the first aspect of that is actually managing land together versus the buying of land. The managing of the land or working together as a community, that can be done, as Rob has said and Curtis has said, is like with everybody can still own their individual property, and you can just work together as it makes sense. When it comes to actually buying land, basically pooling your financial resources in a way that isn't through the kind of standard, fiat debt-based money system. There's other ways to do it that don't require you to be in the same bed together, so that you could still maintain your liquidity or something like that. And so this is where, Rob, do you remember what the name of that is? It's like cooperative backed mortgages, or
I can't remember the name.
Yeah. Rob Sinclair is his name, but basically it's this idea of like, so there are people in the world who have a ton of money right now, like financial capital, and they are terrified that it is about to evaporate, with the Great Reset or, any other, future scenario where this fiat currency is just, everybody realizes that it's the house of cards that it is. And so perhaps there's a way that you can buy land as an individual, but you can pool money from a community member who's really excited about this work, and they want to invest in something that has real physical value, that's moving towards the vision that they themselves are excited about, and everybody wins that way. And so like I've done this myself with smaller loans with my community. I've done like $5, $10, and even like $30,000 loans with community members. And there's people in our community that we know who have mortgaged, I think it was like a $500,000 property in Calgary. So that could be another way to achieve that same function without any of the downsides.
We used to call that a community bond.
Yeah.
Where people in a community would fund, say, the purchase of 50 head of cattle or something, and everybody puts in $5,000, and then they get product for a certain amount of years, and then they get their money back at the end. There's different ways you can structure it, but you can do things like that. You just got to be creative, Yeah. There's a lot of options. And it's funny too, because this is, everybody's thinking about this right now.